The sun hung mercilessly over Clifton, Texas, as Henry Fletcher stood at his wife's grave with flowers wilting in his calloused hand. The realization hitting him like a runaway stagecoach today would have been Teresa's 32nd birthday. In the 3 years since her passing, he had never once forgotten the day, until now. April 1876 marked the beginning of another scorching summer in this dusty corner of Texas. Henry had been up since before dawn, working his modest cattle ranch outside town. His mind occupied with a troublesome heifer and the broken fence in the north pasture. It wasn't until he'd ridden into town for supplies that he'd glanced at the date on the general store's calendar and felt his heart plummet. "Damn," he whispered, his voice carrying no further than the wind. He'd grabbed the first bunch of wildflowers he could find on the ride to the cemetery, but they seemed a pitiful offering now. Henry removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked hair and a deeply tanned face weathered by 35 years of frontier living. His blue eyes, once bright with youthful ambition, had dulled since Teresa's passing. The smallpox epidemic that had swept through Clifton in '73 had taken not just his wife but their unborn child as well, leaving Henry with an emptiness no amount of hard work could fill. "I'm sorry, Tess," he murmured, placing the flowers against her headstone. "I don't know how I forgot." Behind him, the sound of approaching footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Henry didn't turn around, assuming it was just another mourner coming to visit the departed. "Mr. Fletcher? I thought I might find you here today." Henry recognized the voice immediately. Tabitha Dawson, the widow who ran the bakery in town. Her husband James had been taken in the same epidemic that claimed Teresa, leaving her to raise their young son alone and manage the business by herself. "Mrs. Dawson," Henry acknowledged, turning to face her. Tabitha stood a few paces away, holding a small covered basket. At 28, she still possessed a quiet beauty that even widowhood couldn't diminish. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a practical bun, though a few stubborn tendrils had escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple blue dress, modest and practical like everything else about her. "I remembered it was Teresa's birthday," she said softly. "I brought something for you." Henry's throat tightened unexpectedly. "That's kind of you, madam, but not necessary." Tabitha stepped closer and pulled back the cloth covering the basket to reveal a small cake, frosted in white with delicate sugar flowers decorating the top, the kind Teresa had always admired in the bakery window. "She'd want you to celebrate her, Mr. Fletcher, not just mourn her." Henry stared at the cake, momentarily speechless. He and Tabitha had exchanged pleasantries in town over the years, but they'd never shared more than brief conversations about the weather or business matters. The thoughtfulness of her gesture caught him entirely off guard. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "You don't need to say anything," Tabitha replied. "Teresa was always kind to me when I first opened the bakery. She'd come by every morning for coffee and would tell me stories about your courtship." A small smile touched Tabitha's lips. "She loved you very much, you know." Henry swallowed hard. "I don't deserve this kindness, Mrs. Dawson. I actually forgot what day it was until I saw the calendar in Peterson's store. What kind of husband forgets his wife's birthday, even after she's gone?" Tabitha's expression softened. "A human one, Mr. Fletcher. Grief doesn't follow rules or calendars." She hesitated before continuing. "My Timothy has been asking about you. He remembers how you taught him to lasso last summer when you delivered that beef to the restaurant. He's 10 now and full of questions about ranching. Perhaps you might join us for supper sometime. Share this cake." Henry looked at Tabitha, really looked at her for perhaps the first time. Behind the polite exterior of the widow Dawson, he saw something unexpected: understanding. Not pity, not judgment, but genuine understanding. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Dawson," he said finally. "Tabitha, please," she corrected him with a gentle smile. Might I suggest tonight? Unless you have other plans. Henry glanced back at Teresa's grave. For a moment, he could almost hear her teasing voice. Go on, Henry Fletcher. You've mourned enough. Tonight would be fine, he agreed. Should I bring anything? Just yourself, Tabitha said. And perhaps a story or two about Teresa that Timothy and I haven't heard. She'd want us to remember the joy, don't you think? As they walked together down the cemetery path, Henry felt something shift inside him, not an ending to his grief, but perhaps the first tentative step toward something new. The wildflowers he'd left on Teresa's grave caught a gust of wind, scattering petals across the stone as if in blessing. The Dawson home sat on the eastern edge of Clifton, a modest but well-maintained cottage with a small garden out front. Even from the road, Henry could see Timothy playing with a wooden horse in the yard. The boy spotted him approaching and jumped to his feet with excitement. Mr. Fletcher, did you bring your rope? Can you show me that trick again? Timothy called, running to meet him at the gate. Henry couldn't help but smile. Not today, son, but I'll bring it next time, I promise. Timothy's disappointment lasted only seconds before his attention shifted to the basket his mother carried. Is that cake? Tabitha laughed, a light, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the evening air. It is indeed, and you'll get your share after supper. Now go wash up. The boy dashed inside, leaving Henry and Tabitha standing in the front yard. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the garden and illuminating Tabitha's face with a warm glow. He's a good boy, Henry remarked. He is, she agreed. Though sometimes I worry I'm not enough, that he needs a man's guidance. From what I can see, you're doing a fine job, Tabitha. She met his eyes briefly before looking away. That's kind of you to say. Please, come inside. The interior of the Dawson home reflected its mistress, practical but inviting, with simple furniture and touches that spoke of care rather than ostentation. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table, already set for 3. The aroma of beef stew filled the air, reminding Henry how long it had been since he'd eaten a proper home-cooked meal. It's not fancy, Tabitha said, noticing his appreciative glance toward the pot simmering on the stove. But it's filling. Smells better than anything I've made for myself in years, Henry admitted. Supper passed pleasantly, with Timothy dominating the conversation, peppering Henry with questions about ranching, horses, and cattle. Henry found himself engaging with the boy's curiosity, explaining how to tell a good cutting horse from an average one, how to predict weather changes by watching cattle behavior. Can I visit your ranch someday? Timothy asked, scraping the last bit of stew from his bowl. Henry glanced at Tabitha, who gave a slight nod. I suppose that could be arranged. If your mother approves, you might even help me with the spring calves. Timothy's eyes widened with excitement. Can I, Ma? Please. We'll see, Tabitha said, but her smile suggested it was more a when than an if. Now, how about that cake? The cake was brought forth with ceremony, placed in the center of the cleared table. 3 candles had been added to the top. One for each year she's been watching over you, Tabitha explained softly to Henry. The simple gesture threatened to undo him. He blinked rapidly, focusing on the flame of the nearest candle until he regained his composure. To Teresa, Tabitha said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. Who would want us to celebrate her life with sweetness? To Mrs. Fletcher, Timothy echoed solemnly, raising his glass of milk. Henry raised his own cup. To Tess, he said, using the name only he had called her. Who always did love your sugar flowers, Mrs. Dawson. Tabitha's smile held a hint of sadness. James loved them too. Funny how it's the small details we remember most. After they'd eaten their slices of cake, Timothy devoured his in what seemed like 3 enthusiastic bites. The boy was sent to finish his schoolwork before bed. Henry and Tabitha moved to the small front porch, where two rocking chairs invited them to sit and watch the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "Thank you for this," Henry said after a comfortable silence. "I've been alone with my memories for so long. I'd forgotten what it was like to share them." "I understand," Tabitha replied. "After James died, people stopped mentioning him around me. I think they believed it was kindness, but it felt more like he was being erased." Henry nodded. "Exactly so, as if our grief was too burdensome for others to acknowledge." "Teresa was lovely," Tabitha said. "She used to tell me about your courtship, how you rode 15 miles through a thunderstorm just to deliver a book she'd mentioned wanting to read." Henry chuckled. "I was soaked to the skin and struck by lightning twice, according to my telling of it." Tess would roll her eyes every time I added another bolt of lightning to the story. James was the same way. His fishing stories grew more elaborate with each telling. Tabitha's smile faded slightly. "I miss those stories, exaggerations and all." Another comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated only by the gentle creaking of the rocking chairs and the distant call of a nighthawk. "May I ask you something, Henry?" Tabitha said suddenly. "Of course. Do you ever feel guilty for still being here when they're gone?" Henry considered this. "Every day," he admitted. "And lately, I've been feeling guilty for something else too." "What's that?" "For wanting to feel something besides grief again." He turned to look at her profile in the gathering darkness. "Does that make sense to you?" Tabitha nodded slowly. "More than you know." As the stars multiplied overhead, they shared stories of their departed spouses, sometimes laughing, sometimes lapsing into contemplative silence. By the time Henry realized how late it had grown, Timothy had long since been put to bed, and the town of Clifton was quiet around them. "I should go," Henry said reluctantly, rising from his chair. "It's a long ride back to your ranch," Tabitha observed. "We have a spare room. You're welcome to stay." Henry hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose, or cause talk in town." "Let them talk," Tabitha said with unexpected firmness. "We're two people who've lost much, finding comfort in remembrance. There's no shame in that." In the end, Henry accepted her offer, bedding down in the small room that had once been James Dawson's study. Sleep came more easily than it had in years, his dreams for once not haunted by what he had lost, but gently touched by possibilities he had never considered. The morning dawned clear and bright, with birdsong filtering through the curtains. Henry rose early, as was his habit, and found Tabitha already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's baking. "You're up with the sun," she remarked, not pausing in her work. "Farm habits," he explained, feeling strangely awkward in the daylight. "I should be getting back to my place. The cattle won't feed themselves." Tabitha nodded, dusting flour from her hands. "Of course, but Henry, yesterday meant a great deal to me. Having someone who understands, it's not something I've found often." "Nor I," Henry admitted. Perhaps I might call again? Bring Timothy out to see the ranch this weekend." The smile that illuminated Tabitha's face was answer enough. As spring melted into summer, Henry found himself making the ride into town more frequently. Sometimes he'd stop by the bakery under the pretense of kneading bread, though he'd never shown much interest in baked goods before. Other times, he'd appear at the Dawson door with a fresh catch of fish or a rabbit for their supper. Timothy became a regular visitor at the ranch, his natural affinity with animals making him a surprisingly helpful hand with the gentler tasks. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Clifton was too small for any development to go unremarked. Most approved a widow and widower finding comfort in each other's company seemed natural enough. Some, like old Mrs. Gunderson who ran the boarding house, sniffed disapprovingly about proper mourning periods. But such criticisms were generally ignored. By August, Henry had taken to escorting Tabitha to Sunday services, an act that constituted a formal declaration of intentions in the eyes of Clifton society. Yet neither Henry nor Tabitha had spoken directly of their growing attachment, as if putting words to it might somehow disturb its natural progression. It was Timothy who finally forced the issue, with the directness only a child can muster. "Are you going to marry my ma, Mr. Fletcher?" he asked one afternoon as they mended a fence line together. Henry nearly hammered his thumb in surprise. "What makes you ask that, Timothy?" The boy shrugged, handing Henry another nail with the solemnity of a surgical assistant. "Billy Rogers says his pa says you're courting, and when people court, they get married. That's what happened with my ma and pa." Henry set down his hammer, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "Would it bother you if I were thinking about courting your mother?" Timothy's brow furrowed in thought. "Not if you taught me to ride Thunderbolt." Henry suppressed a smile at the boy's negotiation. Thunderbolt was Henry's prized quarter horse, a spirited animal that even experienced riders found challenging. "Thunderbolt might be a bit much for a boy your size," Henry said diplomatically, "but I have a gentle mare that would suit you better. And if your mother agreed, you could help train her new foal when it's born next spring." Timothy's eyes lit up. "Does that mean you are going to marry Ma?" Henry realized he'd been neatly outmaneuvered by a 10-year-old. "It means I'm thinking about asking her," he admitted. "But these things take time, Timothy, and respect." The boy nodded sagely. "Ma says the same thing about making good bread. You can't rush it or it won't rise proper." Henry chuckled. "Your mother is a wise woman." That evening, after returning Timothy to town, Henry lingered at the Dawson home. Tabitha invited him to stay for supper, as had become their custom. But there was a new tension in the air, as if Timothy had shared his afternoon questioning with his mother. After the meal, when Timothy had been sent to bed, Tabitha and Henry took their usual places on the porch. The August heat still hung heavy in the air, making the night feel close and intimate. "Timothy asked me an interesting question today," Henry began. Tabitha's hands stilled in her lap. "Did he?" "He wanted to know if I was planning to marry you." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "That boy has never learned the art of subtlety." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was thinking about asking you," Henry said, his heart suddenly pounding as if he'd run all the way from his ranch. "But that these things shouldn't be rushed." "And what did he say to that?" "He compared it to making bread. Said his mother had taught him good things can't be rushed." Tabitha laughed softly. "He absorbs more than I realize sometimes." Henry turned to face her fully. "Tabitha, I never expected to feel this way again after Teresa. When she died, I thought that part of me died too. But these past months—" "I know," she said simply. "I've felt it too." "Do you think it's wrong?" he asked, giving voice to the doubt that had lingered at the edges of his happiness. "To find joy again so soon?" Tabitha considered this. "James has been gone 5 years now, Henry. Teresa for 3. Perhaps it doesn't seem so soon to anyone but us." She reached over and placed her hand over his. "And perhaps they wouldn't want us to measure our lives by their absence." Henry turned his hand to clasp hers. "You're right, of course. You usually are. Now there's a statement worth remembering," she teased gently. "Tabitha Dawson," Henry said, sudden determination filling him. "I'm not a wealthy man. My ranch is modest, and I work from sunup to sundown most days. But I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." In the silvery moonlight, he could see her eyes shine with unshed tears. "Are you certain, Henry? I come with a half-grown boy and a business in town." "I'm counting on it," Henry replied. "Timothy is a fine young man who deserves a father's guidance, and I've developed quite a taste for your sourdough bread." Tabitha laughed through her tears. That's not much of a foundation for marriage. No, Henry agreed, his expression growing serious. But this is. He leaned forward and kissed her gently, a first kiss that held both hesitancy and promise. When they parted, Tabitha's cheeks were flushed. Well, she said a little breathlessly, I suppose that settles it. Is that a yes? It's a yes, Henry Fletcher, though we should perhaps wait until after harvest to make it official. Give the town gossips something to sustain them through the winter. Henry agreed, though privately he thought waiting until after harvest nearly 3 months away seemed an eternity. Still, Tabitha was right about the practicalities. A fall wedding would allow them to combine households before winter set in, and would give Timothy time to adjust to the idea of having a stepfather. As summer waned, Henry threw himself into preparations for both the harvest and his new life. The small bedroom at his ranch house was cleared out and painted for Timothy. The main bedroom, which Henry had not changed since Teresa's death, was finally emptied of her belongings, each item carefully packed away in a trunk for safekeeping. It was a difficult task, but Henry found it more bittersweet than painful a necessary transition rather than a betrayal. Tabitha, meanwhile, began training her assistant at the bakery to take on more responsibility, knowing that while she would still oversee the business, her primary residence would soon be at Henry's ranch outside town. Timothy approached the coming changes with the adaptability of youth, excited about living on a real ranch and having animals of his own to care for. He had taken to calling Henry Sir instead of Mr. Fletcher, a small but significant shift that indicated his acceptance of the new family arrangement. By the time October arrived, bringing with it cooler temperatures and the completion of the harvest, all of Clifton knew of the upcoming nuptials. The wedding was to be a simple affair at the small white church in town, followed by a gathering at the town hall where, by general consensus, Tabitha's famous apple pies would feature prominently. 2 days before the wedding, Henry rode into town earlier than usual, a small package secured in his saddlebag. He'd made a special order from a jeweler in San Antonio, a gold locket to replace the one Tabitha had sold years ago to keep the bakery afloat after James's death. Inside, he'd placed a tiny photograph of Timothy on one side, leaving the other empty for a future family portrait. As he approached the bakery, he noticed something unusual. The door was closed in the middle of the day, with a small sign indicating "Closed for family matters." A twist of concern tightened in Henry's chest. Tabitha never closed the bakery during business hours, not even when she had been ill with fever last winter. He tied his horse at the post and knocked at the side door that led to the Dawson living quarters. Timothy answered, his young face tight with worry. "Sir, I was just about to come find you. Ma's sick." Henry felt his heart drop. "What kind of sick, Timothy?" "Dr. Pearson says it's influenza. He's in with her now." Henry pushed past the boy, taking the narrow stairs 2 at a time. In the small bedroom at the top, he found Dr. Pearson bent over Tabitha, who lay pale and sweating in her bed. "Fletcher," the doctor acknowledged without looking up. "You shouldn't be here. Influenza is highly contagious." "How bad is it?" Henry asked, ignoring the warning. Dr. Pearson straightened, his face grave. "Bad enough. There's an outbreak starting 3 cases already this morning. Mrs. Dawson's fever is very high." Tabitha's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Henry's voice. "Henry," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here. The wedding." "Don't worry about that now," Henry said, moving to her side and taking her hand. "Just focus on getting well." "I've given her quinine for the fever," Dr. Pearson said. "Keep her cool and hydrated. If the fever doesn't break by morning." He left the sentence unfinished, but his expression spoke volumes. As the doctor prepared to leave, Henry followed him onto the landing. "Give it to me straight, document. How concerned should I be?" The physician sighed. Influenza's unpredictable, Fletcher. Some shake it off in a few days. Others. He glanced back toward the bedroom. Mrs. Dawson is strong, but this strain seems particularly virulent. I've sent for more medicine from Austin, but it won't arrive for days. After the doctor left, Henry returned to Tabitha's side. He sent Timothy to inform the ranch hand, Hank, that he wouldn't be returning that night, then settled in for what he knew might be a long vigil. The night passed in a blur of cool compresses, spoonfuls of water, and murmured prayers. Tabitha drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing Henry, sometimes calling for James or her long-deceased parents. By dawn, her fever had risen further, and a rattling sound accompanied each labored breath. Timothy, who had finally fallen asleep in a chair by the window, woke with the first light. "Is Ma better?" he asked, the hope in his voice nearly breaking Henry's resolve. "Not yet, son," Henry answered honestly. "But she's fighting hard." The boy's face crumpled. "I can't lose her too." Henry pulled Timothy into an embrace, the first he'd ever initiated with the boy. "We're not going to lose her," he said, trying to infuse his voice with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Your mother is the strongest person I know, Dr. Pearson returned mid-morning, his face betraying his concern when he examined Tabitha. "The fever's still climbing," he said, "and there's fluid in her lungs now. What can we do?" Henry demanded. "Keep doing what you're doing, and pray." The doctor hesitated. "Fletcher, you should know 2 more cases turned fatal overnight. The Morgan's eldest girl and old man Tanner." Henry felt a cold dread settle over him. "You're saying to prepare myself. I'm saying this is serious. But Mrs. Dawson is getting better care than most, thanks to you being here." The doctor packed his bag. "I'll return this evening." As the day wore on, Tabitha's condition continued to deteriorate. Her breathing grew more labored, and despite Henry's constant efforts with cool compresses, her fever refused to abate. Timothy remained by his mother's side, reading to her from her favorite book of poetry. His young voice steady even as tears occasionally slipped down his cheeks. By sunset, Henry was nearly frantic with worry. Dr. Pearson had not returned as promised, likely caught up with other patients as the outbreak spread through town. Tabitha had not been fully conscious for hours, and her skin had taken on a bluish tinge that Henry recognized all too well from Teresa's final days. "We need to do something," he muttered, more to himself than to Timothy. "Something more." The boy looked up from his vigil. "Like what, sir?" Henry paced the small room, his mind racing. Then, abruptly, he stopped. "Ice. We need ice to bring down her fever." "But there's no ice in Clifton this time of year," Timothy protested. "There is at Carson's mill," Henry said, already moving toward the door. "They cut ice from the northern lakes in winter and store it in their ice house for shipping beef. It's about 10 miles from here." "You're going now?" Timothy asked, alarmed. "But it's getting dark." "I know these trails better than my own face," Henry assured him. "I'll be back before midnight. Keep applying the compresses and try to get her to drink if she wakes." Without waiting for a response, Henry thundered down the stairs and out to his horse. The sky was already darkening as he spurred the animal toward the outskirts of town, pushing for speed despite the failing light. The ride to Carson's mill was treacherous in the dark, but fear for Tabitha drove Henry forward. He reached the mill just as they were closing for the night, and it took all his powers of persuasion and a considerable sum of money to convince the foreman to open the ice house. "Woman must mean a lot to you," the grizzled man commented as he wrapped blocks of ice in burlap and sawdust for transport. "She's everything," Henry said simply. The return journey was slower, as Henry had to be careful not to lose his precious cargo. By the time he reached Clifton, it was well past midnight, and a light rain had begun to fall, making the streets slick and muddy. To his surprise, Dr. Pearson's buggy was outside the bakery. Henry rushed in, the bundled ice clutched to his chest. "How is she?" he demanded as soon as he entered the sick room. Dr. Pearson turned from the bed, his expression somber. "Not good, Fletcher. The infection in her lungs is spreading." Henry unwrapped the ice. "I brought this to bring down her fever." "A good thought," the doctor acknowledged, helping him arrange the ice around Tabitha's burning body. "But at this stage, I'm not sure it's enough." "It has to be enough," Henry insisted. "We're getting married the day after tomorrow." Dr. Pearson placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. "Fletcher, Henry, I think you should prepare Timothy for the possibility." "No," Henry cut him off. "I've lost one wife, document. I'm not losing another before I even have the chance to make her my wife." He looked down at Tabitha's still form, her chest rising and falling with painful effort. "What else can we do?" The doctor hesitated. "There's a treatment experimental. I've had some success with it in severe cases, but it's risky." "What kind of treatment?" "A mustard plaster on the chest, combined with steam inhalation and a tincture of foxglove to strengthen the heart. But the foxglove can be toxic if the dosage is wrong, and in her weakened state." "Do it," Henry said without hesitation. "She'd want us to fight." Through the remainder of the night, Henry and Dr. Pearson worked tirelessly, applying the mustard plaster, creating steam by pouring water over heated bricks, and carefully administering the foxglove tincture. Timothy had finally been persuaded to sleep in his own room, though Henry suspected the boy was merely lying awake, listening to the movements in his mother's sick room. As dawn approached, Tabitha's fever finally began to subside. Her breathing remained labored, but some of the bluish tinge had receded from her skin. "It's a good sign," Dr. Pearson said cautiously, "but she's not out of danger yet. The next 12 hours will be critical." Henry nodded, too exhausted for words. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, but the thought of leaving Tabitha's side was unimaginable. The doctor packed his bag. "Get some rest, Fletcher, even if it's just in that chair. You won't be any good to her if you collapse." After the doctor left, Henry pulled the chair closer to Tabitha's bed and took her hand in his. "I'm right here, Tabitha," he murmured. "Timothy and I are waiting for you to come back to us." Whether it was exhaustion or the soothing rhythm of Tabitha's now more regular breathing, Henry eventually drifted into a restless sleep, his head resting on the edge of her bed, their hands still intertwined. He woke to the sensation of fingers gently stroking his hair. For a moment, disoriented by sleep and worry, he thought it might be Teresa. Then his eyes focused on Tabitha's face, pale but alert, looking down at him with a weak smile. "You look terrible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Henry let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're one to talk. How long have I been ill?" 2 days. Henry lifted her hand to his lips. "You gave us quite a scare." Tabitha's eyes filled with concern. "Timothy? He's fine. Worried about you, but fine. He's been very brave." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Timothy appeared in the doorway, his hair rumpled from sleep. When he saw his mother awake, his face transformed with joy. "Ma!" he cried, rushing to the bed. "Careful," Henry cautioned. "Your mother is still very weak." Timothy approached more slowly, climbing onto the bed with unusual gentleness to lay his head against his mother's shoulder. "I read to you from your poetry book," he told her solemnly, "and Sir rode all the way to Carson's mill in the dark to bring back ice for your fever." Tabitha's eyes met Henry's over her son's head. "You did that." "I'd have ridden to the moon and back if that's what it took," Henry said simply. Dr. Pearson's return interrupted the moment. After examining Tabitha thoroughly, he pronounced her on the road to recovery, though he warned it would be weeks before she regained her full strength. And as for this wedding I hear was planned for tomorrow, he added sternly, that will need to be postponed until Mrs. Dawson is completely recovered. Of course, Henry agreed. The last thing— No, Tabitha interrupted, surprising them all with the firmness in her weak voice. I don't want to wait. Henry moved closer to the bed. Tabitha, you can barely sit up. I nearly died, Henry, she said, her eyes intense despite her physical weakness. I don't want to wait another day to become your wife. Dr. Pearson cleared his throat. Mrs. Dawson, I must strongly advise against— Could we do it here? She asked, ignoring the doctor's protests. A small ceremony, just us and Timothy and the minister. Henry looked at the determination in her face and felt his resistance crumbling. If that's what you want, he said softly. But only if Dr. Pearson agrees it won't harm your recovery. All eyes turned to the physician, who sighed in resignation. A brief ceremony only, and she stays in bed. And no marital activities until she's fully recovered. Henry felt his face flush, but nodded. I'll go speak with Reverend Harris. Reverend Harris, a practical man who had seen the frontier change many who might have been rigid elsewhere, agreed to perform a bedside ceremony that same afternoon. Word spread quickly through the small town, and despite the influenza fears, several of Tabitha's closest friends insisted on attending, along with Henry's ranch hand Hank, who arrived wearing a freshly pressed shirt and bearing wildflowers from the prairie. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Tabitha, propped up against her pillows and wearing her best nightgown with a shawl around her shoulders, looked pale but radiant. Henry stood beside her bed, his hand holding hers as they exchanged vows that seemed all the more profound given how close they had come to losing their chance at a future together. In sickness and in health, Henry repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Till death do us part, Tabitha finished, squeezing his hand. When Reverend Harris pronounced them man and wife, Henry leaned down to place a gentle kiss on his bride's lips. Timothy, who had watched the proceedings with solemn interest, suddenly broke into a wide grin. Does this mean I can call you Pa now? He asked Henry. The room filled with laughter, breaking the tension of the past days. I'd be honored, Henry replied, ruffling the boy's hair. As the small gathering of friends offered their congratulations, Dr. Pearson watched the proceedings with a cautious eye, eventually shooing everyone out when he judged Tabitha had endured enough excitement for one day. That includes you, Mr. Fletcher, he said pointedly. Your wife needs rest. I understand, Henry said, though the thought of leaving Tabitha now that she was finally his wife was difficult to bear. Tabitha smiled up at him. You should go home and get some proper sleep yourself, she said. You've barely left that chair in days. Home is where you and Timothy are, Henry replied. But I will go check on the ranch and be back in the morning. He kissed her forehead. Mrs. Fletcher. The name brought a flush of pleasure to Tabitha's pale cheeks. I like the sound of that. Recovery came slowly but steadily. By Christmas, 6 weeks after the impromptu wedding, Tabitha was strong enough to make the move to Henry's ranch, though she still tired easily and required frequent rest. The bakery remained in the capable hands of her assistant, with Tabitha making occasional visits to oversee operations. Timothy flourished in his new environment, taking to ranch life with enthusiasm. True to his promise, Henry began teaching the boy to ride, starting with the gentle mare and working up to more spirited mounts as his skills improved. By spring, Timothy was helping with the cattle drive to the spring pastures, sitting tall in the saddle like a born cowhand. As for Henry and Tabitha, their marriage deepened with each passing day. They found in each other not replacements for what they had lost, but new companionship that honored rather than diminished their past loves. On Teresa's birthday the following April, they rode together to the cemetery, bringing flowers and sharing stories with Timothy about the woman who had once been Henry's world. "She would have liked you," Henry told Tabitha as they stood before the headstone. "You have the same kind of strength. And James would have approved of you taking care of his son," Tabitha replied. "He always worried about leaving us alone." That evening, after Timothy had gone to bed, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Tabitha's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, where their child, a new beginning neither had expected, was growing. "Do you ever think about how strange life's paths can be?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't forgotten Teresa's birthday that day, if you hadn't baked that cake, if you hadn't come to supper." Henry took her hand, marveling at how completely his life had transformed in a single year. "I believe Teresa would say it was meant to be." "James too," Tabitha agreed. "Though he'd probably add something about me finally finding a man who appreciates good baking." Henry laughed. "Well, he'd be right about that." As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch, two people who had found in each other not just love, but healing. The ranch stretched out before them, cattle occasionally lowing in the distance, the future unfurling with possibilities neither had dared to imagine after their losses. By October of 1877, their family had grown to include a healthy baby boy they named Samuel, after Tabitha's father. Timothy, now 11, took his role as older brother with serious pride, already planning the many ranching skills he would teach his sibling when he was old enough. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under Henry's careful management, eventually growing to become one of the more successful operations in the county. Tabitha's bakery continued to thrive under her occasional guidance, providing a steady second income that allowed them to weather the inevitable difficult seasons that came with ranching life. In 1879, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Elizabeth after Henry's mother. Timothy, by then a teenager showing promise as a genuine cattleman, pretended indifference to his baby sister, but was frequently caught making faces at her or carving small wooden toys for her amusement. Through it all, Henry and Tabitha maintained their tradition of remembering those they had lost. Each year on Teresa's birthday, a cake appeared at the supper table. On the anniversary of James's passing, they would share stories of his life with Timothy, ensuring that Samuel and Elizabeth grew up understanding the full tapestry of their blended family's history. By the spring of 1886, 10 years after that fateful day at the cemetery, Clifton had grown into a prosperous town with a rail connection to Fort Worth. The Fletcher Ranch had become a local institution, known for its quality cattle and the fairness of its proprietor. Timothy, now 20, had recently purchased his own small plot of land adjacent to the ranch, with plans to build a house and start his own herd, though he still worked alongside Henry managing the main operation. On a warm April evening, Henry and Tabitha once again found themselves on the porch of their ranch house. Samuel, now 8, was attempting to teach Elizabeth, 6, how to lasso a fence post in the yard, their laughter floating on the twilight air. 10 years, Henry mused, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you brought that cake to Teresa's grave. And sometimes it feels like we've always been together, Tabitha replied, leaning into his embrace. The years had added silver threads to her chestnut hair and fine lines around her eyes, but to Henry, she grew more beautiful with each passing season. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Taking a chance on a broken-down rancher who couldn't even remember his own wife's birthday?" Tabitha turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the same depth of feeling they had shown on their wedding day. "Never. Not for a single moment." In the yard, Samuel let out a whoop of triumph as his small lasso settled around the fence post. Elizabeth clapped her hands, demanding her turn. Beyond them, the vastness of the Texas range stretched toward the horizon, painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. "You know," Henry said thoughtfully, "in all these years, I've never asked what made you bake that cake that day. What made you come find me at the cemetery?" Tabitha was quiet for a moment, watching their children play. "I'd seen you ride into town that morning," she finally said. "You looked lost. And I remembered how that felt after James died. Then I remembered it was Teresa's birthday, and I thought about how she'd always loved celebrating, how she'd tell me that life was too precious to waste on sadness." "She did love a celebration," Henry agreed, smiling at the memory. "So I baked the cake she always admired but would never buy for herself because she thought it too extravagant. And I took it to you because—" Tabitha paused. "Because I thought perhaps we both needed to remember that grief isn't the only thing left when someone we love dies. That celebration has its place too." Henry turned to fully face his wife, taking both her hands in his. "You saved me that day, Tabitha Fletcher, in more ways than you'll ever know." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "And look what we've built together." As if on cue, Samuel called out, "Pa! Ma! Look at us!" Both children now had their small ropes whirling above their heads, their faces alight with the simple joy of accomplishment. Henry and Tabitha rose together to applaud their children's efforts, their hands finding each other naturally, fingers intertwining as they had countless times over the years. Behind them, the ranch house stood solid and welcoming against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with lamplight, a beacon of the home and family they had created from the ashes of their separate griefs. And though neither spoke it aloud, both felt the same certainty, that somewhere Teresa and James were watching with approval, perhaps even sharing a slice of heavenly cake in celebration of all that had grown from a simple act of kindness on a spring day long ago. "She'd want you to celebrate," Tabitha had said that day, offering not just a cake but a permission that Henry hadn't known he needed permission to live again, to love again, to find joy in a world that had seemed irrevocably darkened. In the decades since, they had celebrated life in all its complexity, its sorrows and joys, its endings and beginnings, its constant, surprising capacity for renewal. As night settled fully over the Texas plains, the stars emerged one by one, witnesses to the enduring power of love to transform even the deepest grief into unexpected blessings. And in the warmth of their home, surrounded by the family they had built together, Henry and Tabitha Fletcher continued the celebration that had begun with a widow's cake and a widower's awakening, a celebration of life's remarkable capacity to bring sweetness even from bitter loss.